Diagram 1 below shows two types of unicellular organisms. So preferably you underline this word unicellular organism. So there is two organisms given here, organism P and also organism P and Q. The name is not given. So by right, when you look at this shape, you should immediately know this is supposed to be Paramecium. Take note, Paramecium is a scientific name. So if you are writing by now, Form 5, you should know the rule. If you are writing any scientific name, you need to underline the name. So not only you write Paramecium with a capital P, you need to underline the name. If you are writing an exam, make sure you underline the name Paramecium. Some students ask me, so do I need to write SP dot? Okay, Paramecium, if you want, you can also write SP dot. SP dot is short form for species. But SP dot, no need to underline. No need to underline. Only the name Paramecium you need to underline. And the Paramecium is with a C. SIUM. SIUM is a common name. CIUM is the scientific name. So SP dot, if you feel necessary, you can write. If you write also, no need to underline SP dot. Easy answer is just write Paramecium lah. In case they ask you, just write Paramecium enough. If you feel necessary to write SP dot, write, but no need to underline. It's not a scientific name. Paramecium is the scientific name. So this is Paramecium, this is Amoeba. I'm sure you know that. So when it comes to Paramecium and Amoeba, what are the questions we can ask you? What are the famous questions that we can ask you? The first question here that I've created, based on the diagram, state the kingdom of organism P. Actually, I'm jumping straight to Form 5, Chapter 8. Form 5, Chapter 8, you learn about biodiversity. Under biodiversity, you learn there is 6 different kingdoms. Archaebacteria, Eubacteria, Protista, fungi, Plantae, Animalia. We'll have a separate question for all the kingdom also. Archaebacteria, Eubacteria, Protista, fungi, Plantae, Animalia. Out of the 6 kingdoms, the kingdom that has most of the unicellular organism is the third kingdom. The third kingdom is called as Protista. The word pro, if you have come from my class, you should know. The word pro means before. The word tista means tissue, before tissue. What it means is the organisms under the group, the kingdom Protista, cannot form tissue. That means most of them are supposed to be unicellular organisms. Amoeba and Paramecium comes under a group known as, under kingdom known as Protista. I'm just reminding you, unicellular organism comes under the kingdom Protista. Now, the next question that I have in here is, what is the characteristic of organisms that are found in this kingdom? What is the characteristic? State one characteristic of the kingdom named in 1A1. You just told the examiner is Protista. If Protista, what is the characteristic? So the thing I want you to understand is, this is question A2. This is question A2. I could have made this into a question B, but I didn't make it question B. I made it as question A2. So indirectly, what we are trying to do here is, we are trying to inform the student that this is question A2. That means it is something to do with question A1. Jawapan A2 ada kaitan dengan jawapan A1. So A1, you mention Protista. And if you know the meaning of the Protista, before tissue, that means organisms in this kingdom cannot form tissue. That is supposed to be one of the main characteristics for organisms in this kingdom, which is they don't have tissue organization. Now, how do you remember this? Maybe you remember this from what you learn in the textbook or from the revision book, notebook, and wherever you're studying. Maybe you remember from what you learn in class, but I'm trying to give you a clue. I purposely asked for the name Protista because if you know the meaning, it means before tissue. If you understand that, you can use that to come up with this explanation, which is they don't have tissue organization. Actual SPM also like this. Every question is related to one another. So the second question, sometimes you can get the answer from the not sometimes, many times you will get the answer. You can get the answer from the previous question. They really plan the questions nicely so that you have enough clues when you're doing the question. So at the moment, We have Protista. Protista is the kingdom. Organisms under the kingdom Protista. One of the main characteristics is they don't have tissue. But I wrote here that one of the characteristics, what it means is there is a lot of characteristics. You need to give only one. So the first answer that I got was by looking at the previous question. I see the word Protista. I use it to get the answer. What else is the characteristic? If you look at the diagram, that we have in the question, I have purposely labeled for you nucleus. I have labeled cilia and I have also labeled nucleus. By right, these cells have a lot of other components. I can label the plasma membrane. I can label the cytoplasm. There's a lot of components. But I purposely only label nucleus. So why did I label the nucleus? For you to use in the answer. That's what they normally do in the exam also. When you're looking at the diagram, whatever that is labeled in the diagram, most of the time is labeled for you to use. So if I'm looking at this nucleus in here, immediately what will happen is, if I want, I can use that as the answer. So another characteristic, they have nucleus. So if you want, you can also write the answer here, they have nucleus. If you wrote they have nucleus as the answer, most probably the clue was here. So I just bring a line down. So based on what I have in the diagram, I can use it as the answer also, which is they have nucleus, which is also the characteristic. At the same time, if you look at the diagram here, maybe you can identify, when it comes to paramecium, you should be able to identify this is supposed to be contractile vacuole. This is the contractile vacuole. For paramecium, it's easy to identify. They look something like a star. You can see one on both sides. In Amoeba, this is the contractile vacuole. This circle that looks empty is supposed to be contractile vacuole. Contractile vacuole is basically vacuole. And you should remember that vacuole is surrounded by a membrane. They have a name called tonoplast. Vacuole is surrounded by membrane. Even the one you mentioned earlier, nucleus. Nucleus also is surrounded by double membrane. Meaning, Amoeba and Paramecium, they have components that are surrounded by membrane. In terms of biodiversity, we have Archaebacteria, Eubacteria, and then Protista. Protista is the third kingdom. Archaebacteria, Eubacteria, one of their characteristics is they don't have nucleus. Bacteria don't have nucleus. Bacteria also doesn't have any components surrounded by membrane. The first kingdom that have components surrounded by membrane is Protista. One of the students mentioned is eukaryote. Again, if you have come for the class, you should know eukaryote. The word eu means the real one. Eu means real. Karyote means nucleus. Real nucleus. A true nucleus. Yes, Amoeba and Paramecium, Protista comes under eukaryote. Eukaryote means they have nucleus. And the thing is, nucleus is a component that is surrounded by membrane. They are surrounded by membrane. Diseliputi oleh membran. This is by right another characteristic that you can use for this. I've given you, there is by right more characteristic. I've given you have nucleus. I've given you have membrane-bound organelles, membrane-bound components, or you can also use a tissue organization. But the thing here is, I'm trying to get as much answer as possible from the diagram itself or from the question itself. So meaning, have membrane-bound components, maybe I got it from the contractile vacuole, maybe I got it from the nucleus also, because nucleus is a membrane-bound component. Take note, I'm doing a revision of unicellular organism. I'm doing a revision of unicellular organism. So I have created a structure question. That doesn't mean unicellular organism is going to come as a structure question. It might be an essay question also. They can ask you question A for essay. List the characteristic of Protista, kingdom Protista. These are the answers you need to write in the essay. So I'm just reminding you, if unicellular organism comes out, these are the questions we can ask you. One of the questions we can ask you is, what's the kingdom? and also what is the characteristic of the kingdom. So I'm reminding you the characteristic. At the same time, I'm also trying to show you that most of the time, there are ways to get the answer from the question itself. SPM question is like this. You can get the answer from the previous question. Based on the previous answer, you can create the question many times. Maybe the things that you see in the diagram, you see nucleus, you see contractile vacuole. Maybe you can use that as the answer for the question. This skill is super important for you to get good results for bio. It's the skill of getting the answer from the clues given. The previous question answer is clue. What you have in the diagram supposed to be clue also. If you don't know, don't leave the question empty. Try to look at the question, try to look at the diagram to get the answer. Normally, some clue will be given there for actual SPM question. They give you some kind of help. So if you know where to find the clue, at the moment you know or not, I don't know. By the time we finish the foresight, you should have an idea of where to get the clues to answer the question. At the moment, the two things I've showed you so far, you can get the answer based on the previous question or maybe based on the diagram. So basically, this question is to remind you, it's Protista and what's the characteristic of Protista. Okay, the next question I have here. On diagram 1, label the oral group with alphabet R. So I can ask you to label cilia. I already labeled because cilia is called. If I ask you to label cilia, it's too easy. If I ask you to label the nucleus, easy. If I ask you to label the contractile vacuole, also easy. So just to make it a bit harder question, most students will not know where is the oral groove. So this area here that you see, this is supposed to be the oral groove. The what I'm coloring yellow now is supposed to be the oral groove. So this is R. So this is supposed to be R. Another thing that you need to understand is whenever the question asks you to label, asks you to draw, indirectly what they are informing you is, yes, you label the diagram. While you are labeling the diagram, look at the diagram. Meaning, if you are going to label this as oral groove, look at the oral groove. Something in here might be needed for the next answer. We are trying to bring your attention. You label the R, oral groove. Look at the oral groove. Maybe something in the oral groove is needed for you to answer the question. So when I look at the oral groove, yes, I see it's a long tube, but I also realize that this area here, this is all the cilia. I've already labeled the cilia for you. But you can see the inner surface of the oral groove is actually covered with cilia. Like inside of the mouth is covered with cilia, and the cilia is always beating. As they're beating, basically what happens is they create something like a suction force. These are the food particles. Because the cilia is always beating, what will happen is these food particles will be sucked into the oral groove. Dissolved. The word the textbook use is the food is propelled into the oral groove. It means like they're sucked into the oral groove. When they come too close, the food will be sucked into the oral groove. To create the suction force, to pull the food into the oral groove, the cilia is always beating. If you have any question related to paramecium, if you have any question related to paramecium, you need to use this word rhythmic beat of cilia. You need this word rhythmic beat of cilia. So if I wanted to create an easy question for you, the easy question is explain how paramecium move. The easy question, explain how paramecium move. It moves by rhythmic beat of cilia. If I want to make it an easy question, explain how paramecium move, rhythmic beat of cilia. So that's the easy question. Now, what I was thinking, I want the student to write rhythmic beat of cilia, but I want to make it hard. So what I did, I purposely asked two reasons. I want the students to know where is the oral groove, At the same time, I also want the students to know the rhythmic beat of cilia you can also use for the feeding. For the movement, rhythmic beat of cilia. For feeding, also rhythmic beat of cilia. Easy question, how they move. Other question, how they do feeding. Feeding also, we need to use the word rhythmic beat of cilia. The word rhythmic, two places. For cilia, one more in our syllabus is peristalsis. The word rhythmic, peristalsis. Smooth muscle, contracts and relaxes rhythmically. Contract and then relax. Contract and then relax. For peristalsis, you use the word rhythmic. For cilia also we use the word rhythmic. So when the question asks me, label R, I make sure whichever that I'm labeling, I look at the picture. I try to get some information from the picture because they are already telling me when you label means you must look at R. Whatever that is there, take note of it. Maybe you need to use it in the answer. So I already labeled the oral groove. The next question is, how does the oral groove function? Most probably, many students will be stuck in this question. They won't know what to write. Most probably they're going to leave it empty. Most students know where is the oral groove, but how does it function is something that most of the time you don't know. Most of the time the students will be stuck here. Many students might leave it empty because they don't know what to write. But I have actually already given you clue. Label the oral groove. So indirectly, I already asked you, look at the oral groove. When I look at the oral groove, I see cilia on the inner surface. I can use it as the answer. Inner surface of R is covered with cilia. I didn't create this. In the sense, this answer I got because I took the trouble to look at the diagram. Whatever I'm labeling, I looked at it, I saw some cilia on the inner surface, I use it in the answer. And whenever you have cilia, automatically the word is rhythmic beat of cilia. Rhythmic beat of cilia. What they are going to do in here? Normally, it's to move. In here, to propel the foot. That's the word in the textbook. If you find the word propel hard, at least you can use the word to pull the foot into the oral groove. So that's the next sentence that I have. So inner surface of R is covered with cilia. And what does this cilia do? If I go this side, rhythmic beat of cilia propels the foot into R. Rhythmic beat of cilia propels the foot into R. So a few things that I wanted to do is, I wanted to remind you, if it's paramecium, the word rhythmic beat of cilia will be there in the answer. Either for them to move or for them to do feeding, the word rhythmic beat of cilia. Most students will write, cilia is used to move, to swim. They just use the word cilia. They normally don't use the word rhythmic beat of cilia. So the word rhythmic beat is important when it comes to paramecium. The word used in the textbook, propel, if you find hard, maybe is pulled into the oral groove, fine. By right, this is enough for you to get the marks. But in case they want more explanation, we go back to the diagram. This is supposed to be the oral groove. From here until here is supposed to be the oral groove. Now what you see at the end here is all of these are the foot vacuole. If you want to label, you can label. These are the foot vacuole. Where does the foot vacuole form? It forms right at the ending of the oral groove. So the foot will be pulled into the oral groove. They go right at the end. They become trapped in the foot vacuole. If you need to, check how many marks in the question. If you need to, that can also be an answer for you. That's what I wrote here. The foot is trapped in foot vacuole at the end of R. But my question to you is, this answer that I'm giving you, inner surface is covered with cilia, rhythmic beat of cilia propels the foot into the R, the foot is trapped in foot vacuole at the end of the R. All of these answers, where did I get it from? Mana saya dapat? From the diagram. Most of it I got from the diagram. That is what's going to happen in the actual exam also. Most of the answers will be, the clues will be in the diagram. But the thing is, most students don't use the diagram because you're already mentally programmed. How do you answer the question is, you look at the question, you immediately think of what you read in your notes, in your textbook, whichever. Your answering technique is memory. What if, like this question, maybe, when you ask you, how does oral growth function? Maybe you're suddenly, hey, I didn't read this in the notes. That means you don't know what to do already because you didn't read it. That means you can't remember. So there is another way. Look at the diagram. Look at the diagram. What you see in the diagram, try to use it in the answer. For SPM, it works. They really spend time creating the diagram for you. They really spend time creating the diagram, creating the question. It's created in such a way, they help you, but they don't inform, they don't tell you. You need to realize where the help is given. So at the moment, feeding of the paramecium done. After the feeding, the next question that we love to ask about paramecium is, what is the type of reproduction they do? Now, why we love this question is, most of the students will give the wrong answer for this. The reason being, there is only two types of reproduction. Sexual, asexual. Sexual reproduction, asexual reproduction. The question mentions the pH is decreasing, meaning it's acidic. pH decreasing means acidic means unfavorable condition. Keadaan yang tak sesuai, unfavorable condition. So, we tend to relate unfavorable condition with asexual reproduction. And for example, let's say two deers, male and female, they are in a field, for example, in the grassland, male and female. And then in the distance, there is a lion coming towards them. There is a male and female deer. And there is a lion coming towards them. That is the unfavorable situation. Unfavorable situation because it's life or death situation. So in that situation, unfavorable, the animal's first priority is to survive. Reproduction can do later. First thing is you must survive. So most probably this male-female is going to separate. They are going to save their life. So unfavorable condition, basically either they don't do reproduction, generally don't do reproduction, or maybe they do asexual reproduction. So asexual, we normally relate to unfavorable condition. When they do sexual reproduction, when it's favorable, there is no predator, enough food, enough sunlight, enough temperature, enough oxygen, everything is perfect. There's nothing to worry. Then maybe they start to do sexual reproduction. So sexual reproduction should be favorable condition. Asexual reproduction should be unfavorable condition. That is what we always remember. Sexual reproduction is for favorable condition. Asexual is for unfavorable. If the student have that in mind, when they see the word pH of habitat decrease, unfavorable condition, immediately the student will answer asexual reproduction because condition is not right. So they do asexual reproduction. That's the mindset the students will have. The people who are setting the question knows the student is going to do that. So we purposely ask this question. For the Paramecium especially, unfavorable condition is the time they do sexual reproduction. Another reason we love this question, most students don't remember the name conjugation. Conjugation is the special name for the sexual reproduction that the Paramecium do. Two reasons why we love these questions. One reason, students normally don't remember the name conjugation. Another reason is when the pH or unfavorable condition happens, most of the time the student will answer asexual reproduction. More than 50% of the students will get this wrong because they are going to write asexual reproduction. I'm trying to remind you, when it comes to Paramecium, favorable condition, they do asexual reproduction. Unfavorable condition is the time they do sexual reproduction. So the answer for this question is either you write sexual reproduction or you write conjugation. That is to answer this question. That is to answer this question. I also want to remind you that if it's favorable, they do something called as binary fission. asexual reproduction, which is supposed to be binary fission. So favorable condition, they do asexual reproduction, which is both Amoeba and Paramecium, both is going to do binary fission. Favorable condition. Unfavorable condition, Paramecium do sexual reproduction, conjugation. Amoeba doesn't do sexual reproduction. They form something called as spores. The spores is like they become something like powder, and they just sink to the bottom of the lake. They don't do anything. Since they are not doing anything, they are not active, the word to use is they become dormant. They just sink to the bottom of the lake and remain there until the conditions become favorable again. So normally we don't ask this. We love to ask this one because most students is going to get it wrong. So far I have given you a variety of questions that we can ask about Paramecium. All the questions that we can ask related to Paramecium already asked. I have covered most of the questions related to Paramecium. Normally, if Paramecium comes out, there's another question we love to ask, which is, when we look at the Paramecium, the structure that stands out is this. And on one more on this side. I already labeled earlier contractile vacuole. This is also contractile vacuole, this one. This is also contractile vacuole. We love asking the question, what's the function of contractile vacuole? So in terms of contractile vacuole, the first thing that you need to know is, where does this Amoeba and Paramecium live? Both of them live in fresh water. So both of them live in fresh water, and what's the problem with fresh water is they're supposed to be hypotonic. They have a lot of water. So it's supposed to be hypotonic compared to the cell. Basically, it means outside the cell there is a lot of water. Because outside of the cell there is a lot of water. Let's say this is the water. Because outside cell there's a lot of water, this water will start to diffuse into the cell. You have a process called as osmosis. So in case if the question asks you, what's the function of the contractile vacuole? Fresh water, hypotonic compared to the cell. Because the fresh water is hypotonic, water diffuses into the cell through osmosis. Take note, these two is basically explanation for osmosis. Why there is a problem? Because water is diffusing into the cell through osmosis. This is the problem. We still haven't explained what contractile vacuole do. If you check any of the questions that have Paramecium, picture of Paramecium, there will be always two contractile vacuole. One will be like the star shape here, and one more will be large like what you see in here. All you have to do is convert this into one sentence, convert this into one sentence. If you see they are becoming large, what it means is water is diffusing into the cell. They expand. Make that one mark. If you see them a star shape like this, that's because the water is diffusing out of the cell. Make that as another one mark. The name itself, contractile vacuole. I mean, what they do? They basically contract. So when they contract, what happens? The water is pushed out of cell. Contractile vacuole contracts, push the water out of cell. That's what's happening on this side. When you see this one that is large, the contractile vacuole expand. Why they expand? Because they collect the water that diffuse into cell. Always you see Paramecium, there will be one already shrink, one or still expand. Use that to remember the answer. Why they expand? Because water diffusing. Why they shrink? Because they contract. They are pushing the water out of cell. By doing this, they are controlling osmosis. Controlling osmosis, there is a term you need to use. The main answer for contractile vacuole is this. I just use the short form. In exam, write the full name. Contractile vacuole collects excess water in cell and expands. Contractile vacuole expands when it collects excess water in cell. Dia kumpulkan. If this is the contractile vacuole, for example, if this is the contractile vacuole, originally they are small. As they collect the water, they start to become large, as you see in the diagram. Once they reach maximum size, it contracts to release the water out of cell. The textbook actually didn't use the word excess. You just mentioned they release the water out of cell is fine. By doing that, the contractile vacuole is doing osmoregulation. This is the main answer. It's worth 3 marks. It's worth 3 marks. If the exam question give you 2 marks, any 2 from here should be enough. But again, if the question gives me 2 marks, I can just write this and this as the answer. I'm asking you again. I don't memorize this. How do I know this answer? In the actual exam, how do I get these 2 answers? In the actual exam, mana saya dapat? In the actual exam, how should you go about getting the answer for this? If in case you don't remember. Okay, all of you mentioned is the diagram. Okay, good. So we have covered. So what I have done is I have already covered practically all the questions we can ask about Paramecium. Every single question they can ask about Paramecium already covered. This is what we are going to do. Every question that we are discussing, we cover all the possible questions and also remind you where are the places where you can get the answer. So meaning, if in case Paramecium comes out this year as a question, I've already showed you all the possible question and all the answers for the question. They are not going to change. Only the question might appear different. The answers cannot change. If I ask you how Paramecium move, is the same answer. If I ask you how the feeding of Paramecium occurs, same answer. If Paramecium comes out, chances are high you're going to use the word rhythmic beat of cilia. Rhythmic beat of cilia is what you're most probably going to use. If Amoeba comes out as the question, you are most probably going to use this as the answer. Now, what's the name of this thing that you see here? What's the name? Pseudopodium. Nice to see many of you already know the answers. Pseudopodium. Okay, so if it's cilia, you must use the word rhythmic beat of cilia. And if you realize, rhythmic beat of cilia is what the Paramecium use to move. They use the same thing for feeding. If it's an Amoeba question, then we use Pseudopodium. But Pseudopodium, you must mention it extends outwards. You can see this is the direction they are moving. So they extend outwards. By extending outward, Pseudopodium, by extending outward, what they are doing, they are surrounding the food particle. You can clearly see this is the food particle. This organism that you see here is supposed to be the food particle. So they extend outwards to surround the food particle. That should give you 1 mark. Later, when the Pseudopodium fuse, the food is trapped inside food vacuole. Clearly, you can see this is the food vacuole in which food is already trapped. Later, to digest the food, they are going to use lysosome. This process of trapping the food is called as phagocytosis. Meaning, if Amoeba comes out as a question, chances are high we are going to ask you how they feed. Extending out Pseudopodium, if the question asks you how they move, how they eat, by extending out Pseudopodium. If it's Paramecium, it's about cilia. If it's Amoeba, it's about Pseudopodium. The 3 sentences that you can use to answer the question. Pseudopodium extends outward to surround the food particle. The food particle is trapped in food vacuole. The process is called as phagocytosis. 3 marks. Most probably in the exam, they give you only 2 marks. So any 2 out of these 3 should be enough for you to answer the question. So what I have done in this set of questions here is, unicellular organism is a possible question this year. Possible. Whether come out, we really don't know. So it's a possible question. If it comes out, what are the kind of questions we can ask you? I've already covered, I think I've already covered all that they can ask. And I'm also trying to show you if the question comes out, these are some of the places where you can get the answer. For example, contractile vacuole function. Instead of memorizing what you learn in class, try to relate to it. Oh, you see a large vacuole in here and you see a small vacuole here. Use that to remember the answer. Have reference points. You see oral groove. Inside got cilia. So rhythmic beat of cilia. So most probably the question will have a diagram if it comes up. From the diagram, there is a lot of information you can get. First choice, you remember the answer. If you didn't remember the answer, there is another way to get the answer, which is you can get it from the diagram. You can get it from the diagram. So at the moment, we are done with unicellular organism. The characteristic, the feeding, the movement, the reproduction already covered.